You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength, and you shall love your neighbour as yourself. The question about the most important command was one often discussed by the rabbis of Jesus' time. And the question took two forms, either about the most important class of command or about the one command from which all the rest might be deduced. Rabbi Hillel, a contemporary of Jesus, was asked to give the greatest command, and he replied with a negative form of the golden rule. What you don't like your neighbour to do to you, don't do to your neighbour. And about a century later, Rabbi Aquila identified the command to love one's neighbour as the greatest. Now, scholars have debated whether or not Jesus was the first to combine these two commands to love God and neighbour. Was he the first to combine them? Well, we don't know if this combination originated with Jesus, but we do know that it serves as an excellent summary of what Jesus' teaching and life was about. Now, the point of the first command, to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, is not to divide a person into various component parts. Rather, it is put this way to emphasize that our loving response to God is to be with our whole being. Such love is expressed by obeying God's commands and doing what God wants, rather than in some emotional reaction. Such love can be commanded, while love understood merely as an emotion cannot. Secondly, the second command, that love consists in promoting the good of one's neighbour, is a love that can also be commanded. This is because it is primarily an action. It's an action, not an emotion, and consists in what one does for one's neighbours, not in the feelings one may or may not have towards them. Much has been made of the command to love neighbour as self, as though this were a command to love oneself even to the point of self-indulgence. But this is not the case, because the love commanded is about actions which promote another person's good. The point is that we should be as willing to act for a neighbour's good as we are to act for our own good. For example, we should be as ready to feed a hungry neighbour as we are to feed ourselves. The point is to regard another's needs as being as important as our own needs. What is new from Jesus here in the Gospel reading is that these two commands are intertwined. They are interlocked. In fact, they are so interrelated that one is not valid without the other. In other words, what the Gospel is saying is that the love of God and the love of neighbour are inseparable. Consequently, it is vital that we share responsibilities and concern for the neighbours who live not only in our street or in our community, but who inhabit our global community, our neighbours throughout the world. A number of years ago, I worked as a resource minister within a presbytery, which covered quite a large area. And I was involved with a number of different congregations. These congregations were looking for a way forward. They were uncertain whether they should reduce their property or which direction to go in. Now, some of these experiences made me feel truly humble as I experienced how the lives of some congregations expressed these two commandments so vividly in all that they did and the ways that they related to the surrounding community. One outstanding example of this for me was the Uniting Church congregation in Springvale and Heather Hill. They were combined at that one time, and I was asked to help them make a decision about which property they should hold on to. Now, the congregation, half of it was Anglos, and half of it comprised recently arrived immigrants, Cambodian boat people, Sri Lankans, and most recently, Southern Sudanese people. Now, on the face of it, and logically speaking, Heather Hill was the choice property. Many of the Anglos and the powerful people in the congregation lived around Heather Hill, and it was the logical one. The Springvale property was right in the centre of Springvale. And when we moved together and discerned what was God's will for this congregation, not a matter of what was the logical thing to do or the business approach thing to do, but recognizing that the church is a unique community. How was the Spirit guiding this congregation? What was God wanting this congregation to do in the future? What was the mission of this congregation? And in the end, there was a massive movement in attitude as they discerned that the way forward was not doing the logical business thing of going to the best property, but actually going to where they could be most effective in their mission in the community. And so together they voted to remain in Springvale. It was amazing because these Cambodian boat people had been helped by the congregation to be included in Australian society, and they in turn formed little businesses. Many of them became bakers, and they brought their excess produce to the church and gave it away for free to the Sri Lankans and to the Sudanese people, truly touching their lives. There was also a drug problem in the area too, and some of the young people were caught up in that. And so they felt the focus, the mission of the church was to remain in Springvale, not to be comfortable in Heather Hill, where many of the Anglos lived. And I can remember on the final day that I left, they gathered together for a morning tea, and little kids and adults from these different communities, they all sang together the one hymn that we all know from Sunday school, Jesus Loves Me. And they all sang it in their original language. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. I truly felt blessed to be present. There was a church that knew what was important. Another outstanding example, a bit more recent example, I worked with the congregation of Deep Dean, and Deep Dean had a number of elderly, very well-educated people, and they wanted to find a way that they could be in mission. And we talked to some of the neighbouring congregations, but all they wanted to do was hold on to their building at all costs. They were going to be in their building, and that was it. And then absolutely miraculous thing happened. We actually discovered a Korean congregation who truly wanted to be able to merge into Australian society, not just to worship on their own as a separate entity, but to be truly cross-cultural. And that was amazing, because Deep Dean had this wonderful history. Some of you may have heard of the Mackenzie sisters, Helen and Kath, who actually founded a hospital in Busan in Korea. Helen was an obstetrician and her sister was a nurse, and she set up a school of nursing. And it was a wonderful connection. It was going back together, it was going back in time and rediscovering a future together with the Koreans. And so it was established this cross-cultural congregation. Now, this was an exciting time for the older people in the congregation too, because they became the adoptive grandparents of these young Korean families and the kids, who were absolutely beautiful. And they helped the students with their English, because many of them had been university lecturers and professors and so on. And so it was a real gathering together. At the same time, we were very, very aware that although it was a prosperous area, a bit like Toorak here, there were many, many people who were lonely. They carried out an analysis of the data, and they found there was a high percentage of people living by themselves in the area over the age of 75, and the main issue was that of loneliness. Now, these people wouldn't accept any charity or nothing like that. And so what happened? 2 elderly ladies in the congregation, both very close to the age of 90, researched and established a university of the third age in Deep Dean. It's now the largest university of the third age in this area. It's got over 1,000 members. And people say to me, you know, it's worth getting up in the morning now. There's something to do. There's something interesting and amazing about this. You're never too old to learn new things. And it was about fulfilling the potential and all that these older people could contribute and form community. And that happened because that church was willing to look outside, not just to say, what can we do for our members, but what can we do for the community? It was looking beyond its own survival. Needless to say, I felt exhilarated, energized, and privileged to work with such congregations. There were, however, I have to say, there were a few congregations that one didn't have that experience with. And so rather than talk about specific situations, I'd like to share with you a contemporary parable. On a dangerous sea coast, where shipwrecks often occur, there once was a crude little life-saving station. The building was just a hut, and there was only one boat, but the few devoted members kept a constant watch over the sea, and with no thought for themselves, went out day and night, tirelessly searching for the lost. Many lives were saved by this wonderful little station, so that it became famous. And some of those who were saved and various others in the surrounding area wanted to become associated with the station and give of their time and money and effort for the support of its work. And new boats were bought and new crews trained, and the little life-saving station grew. And some of the members of the life station were unhappy that the building was so crude and poorly equipped. They felt that a more comfortable place should be provided as the first refuge of those saved from the sea. And so they replaced the emergency cots with beds and put better furniture into the enlarged building. And now the life-saving station became the popular gathering place for its members, and they decorated it beautifully and furnished it exquisitely because they used it as a sort of club. Fewer members were now interested in going to sea in life-saving missions, so they hired lifeboat crews to do this work for them. The life-saving motive still prevailed in the club's decoration, and there was a liturgical lifeboat in the room where club initiations were held. About this time, a large ship was wrecked off the coast, and the hired crews brought in boatloads of cold, wet, and half-drowned people. They were dirty and they were sick, and the beautiful new club was in chaos. So the property committee immediately had a shower house built outside the club where the victims of shipwrecks could be cleaned up before coming inside. At the next meeting, there was a split in the club membership. Most of the members wanted to stop the club's life-saving activities as being unpleasant and a hindrance to the normal social life of the club. Some members insisted upon life-saving as a primary purpose and pointed out that they were called a life-saving station. But they were firmly voted down and told that if they wanted to save the lives of various kinds of people who were shipwrecked in these waters, they could begin their own life-saving station down the coast. And so they did. As the years went by, the new station experienced the same changes that had occurred in the old one. It evolved into a club, and yet another life-saving station was founded. And history continued to repeat itself, and if you visit that seacoast today, you will find a number of exclusive clubs along that shore. Shipwrecks are frequent in those waters, but most of the people drown. As I mentioned before, during my ministry with various congregations, I've found it humbling and exciting to be with members of congregations as they become increasingly convinced of the need to look beyond their preoccupation with their own individuals' survival in the short term, and instead focus on becoming a vital, uniting church presence in the area, serving their community, both in the present and in the years to come. In other words, becoming a genuine and wonderful example of what it means to love God and neighbour. To love God with our whole being and to love our neighbour as ourselves has practical implications for each one of us, both locally and globally. It also has implications for the life of our congregations, and it most certainly has implications for the congregation of Toorak.